Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear viewers. Welcome to this session of Meezan study lectures, and we have been studying the Penal Shariah that has been enjoined in the Quran and the way it has been understood by Ustaz Javed and Ghamidi. So, as you all know, this series is basically an effort to understand his book, which is called Meezan in Urdu, and its English translation is called Islam: A Comprehensive Introduction. So, in order to have a better and a deeper understanding of what he has derived and presented in his book, we try to explain his views, and I am very fortunate enough to be his student, and so therefore any confusions that have arisen in my mind while I was translating the book and at the same time also teaching it, I have had the opportunity to discuss my questions with the author himself. So, you would recall that we have been studying the Penal Sharia, which means the nature of Islamic punishments which are prescribed in the Quran. We had seen that basically Islam has prescribed punishments for just 5 crimes and left all other punishments and all other crimes, their punishments to be legislated by the state. And the 5 crimes for which it has prescribed these punishments, we know they are muharba, which is waging war against the Prophet, of course, which means that and the Almighty, which means that you take the law and order in your hand and you try to hoodwink the law and you try to create nuisance in the land and disorder, anarchy. So, very, very strong and very strict punishments were actually proposed for such people, and we discussed them in our last session as well. Then we have the punishment of murder and injury. That we will inshallah discuss today. We have the punishment which is prescribed for theft, that will be discussed, and then fornication and qazf. So, qazf basically means to accuse someone of fornication. So, these are the 5 crimes for which punishments have been prescribed by the Quran, and all the rest have been left to the state to legislate, with this stipulation that as far as the capital punishment is concerned, it cannot be given to any person except a person who is guilty of murdering someone or who is guilty of spreading disorder in the land. We have also seen that the nature of the severity of this punishment is due to the fact that these punishments, they are basically given to a person for violating the contract with which he had entered Islam. So, he had made this very, very strong contract and agreement by entering into religion, entering into the folds of Islam, that he will not violate any of its precepts. So, if he does so, then the punishments which are prescribed are in such that they are given to that person not only as a retribution, not only as a punishment for committing that offense, but also as a punishment for breaking that covenant with God Almighty. The second important thing that we also have to understand is that these punishments, they are extreme forms of reproof, which means that when the criminal has committed the crime in its ultimate form and he deserves no lenience, shall they be given. If any lenience is demanded by the situation, then these extreme forms will not be given. The third important area of this very important discussion is that these punishments have been prescribed for Muslims only. As far as non-Muslims are concerned, subjects or citizens, whatever their status is, their punishments regarding crimes will be legislated in accordance with the modern precepts of law, and they shall be at the same time discussed and debated and become law while taking into account their own opinion. The fourth important area which we have also discussed is that all these punishments are to be given by state authority. No one has the prerogative or the authority to punish a person for a crime himself, or not even a group of people has this prerogative. Only the state authority. So, these basically the punishments of these crimes have been addressed to the state, and the state authorities are authorized. So, no one has the authority to take the law in his own hands. Finally and fifthly, the important thing that we discussed is that some of the important punishments or certain crimes for which punishments are thought to be prescribed are actually the prerogative of God only. He punished people for these offenses in the times of his messengers, and he'll punish them again in the hereafter. But in the post-prophetic era, these punishments will not be given. So, these crimes will not be accounted for, and these are 3. basically polytheism, disbelief, and apostasy. So the punishments of these three crimes is in the domain of God. And He punished them in the times of His messengers when the truth was unveiled in its ultimate form, and people still persisted to deny the Almighty, and hence they were punished. But once messengers of God have left this earth and now the institution of prophethood stands permanently terminated, the only way here is that in this post-prophetic era, nothing shall be done as regards polytheism, as regards disbelief, and as regards apostasy. These will then and now be punished on the day of judgment. So they earlier were punished by God through His messengers, and now He'll punish them again on the day of judgment. But in the post-prophetic era, no such punishment has been prescribed. So with this background, we started to study the punishment that is to be given by people who create a law and order situation, and we saw in our previous session that how these crimes have warranted punishments. Thus, for example, the punishments that were given for people who were guilty of this crime of taking the law in their own hands and creating a law and order situation, and which is called waging war against God and His Prophet, were four. So they were taqtil, tasleeb, amputation of hands or limbs from the opposite side, and finally we had the punishment of exile. So these were the four punishments, and you can see taqtil, which means to mercilessly kill someone. Tasleeb is also very similar, and then amputating the limbs on the opposite side, which means that you leave that person in that situation. So these three are very, very severe and very, very heinous punishments, of course, given to people who merit them. And the final punishment of exile was for the person who deserved any such leniency. So now today we will continue our quest and go on to study the next crime for which punishment has been legislated, and this is the crime of murder and injury. So this murder and injury can be of two types. One is intentional, that you inflict it intentionally, and the other is that you inflict it unintentionally. So for both these situations, the Quran has prescribed punishments, and we will study them and see how we have been given this law. So as far as intentional punishment is concerned, you can see that the Quran has laid it down in a lot of detail, and this is Surah Baqarah verses 178 and 179. So the words are, Ya ayyuhal lazina amanu kutiba alaykum al-qisasu fil qatla al-hurru bil-hurri wal-abdu bil-abdi wal-untha bil-untha faman ufiya lahu min akhihi shay'un fattiba'un bil-ma'ruf wa ada'un ilayhi bi-ihsan zalika takhfifun min rabbikum wa rahma فمن اعتدى بعد ذلك فله عذاب أليم ولكم في القصاص حياة يا أولي الألباب لعلكم تتقون. Believers, decreed for you is the qisas of those among you who are killed. If such a murderer is a free man, then this free man should be killed in his place, and if he is a slave, then this slave should be killed in his place, and if the murderer is a woman, then this woman should be killed in her place. Then for whom there has been some relief from his brother, you can accept this relief. However, after this it is essential that this should be followed according to the ma'ruf, and that should be paid with kindness. This is a concession and a mercy from your Lord. After this, whoever exceeds the limits shall be in a torment afflictive. And there is life for you in qisas, O men of insight, that you may follow the limits set by God. So these verses lay down, as you can see, the punishment of qisas, and we will also see that just as this directive of retaliation of qisas has been given in the Quran to the Muslims, it was also given to the previous nations of the prophets. So while referring to the Old Testament, the Quran has said very similarly, وَكَتَبْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ أَنَّ النَّفْسَ وَكَتَبْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ فِيهَا أَنَّ النَّفْسَ بِالنَّفْسِ وَالْعَيْنَ بِالْعَيْنِ وَالْأَنْفَ بِالْأَنْفِ والأذن بالأذن والسن بالسن والجروح قصاص فمن تصدق به فهو كفارة له ومن لم يحكم بما أنزل الله فأولئك هم الظالمون. And we enjoined for them therein refers to the Torah, the Old Testament, life for life, eye for eye, nose for nose, ear for ear, tooth for tooth, wound for wound. Then he who forgoes, then this shall be an atonement for his own self. And those who do not judge according to what Allah has revealed, it is they who are the wrongdoers. So this is how the law of qisas, which was mentioned in our previous scriptures, has been described. You can see clearly this is verse 45 of Surah Ma'idah. Now, it is evident from this verse that this directive of qisas not only pertains to murder but also relates to wounding or injuring someone. Thus, we see the words are wal juruha qisas, which means that even for injuries and wounds there shall be qisas that shall be exacted. Now, according to the Quran, all these crimes are heinous, but as far as murder is concerned, the Quran says that murdering a person is like murdering whole mankind. So if you murder one person, if you kill one person, the Quran says that it is tantamount to killing all mankind. And thus the words are Man qatala nafsan bighayri nafsin aw fasadin fil ard faka'annama qatala an-nasa jami'a. He who killed a human being without the latter being guilty of killing another or of spreading disorder in the land should be looked upon as if he killed all mankind. So such is the heinous nature of a single murder that the Quran says that who commits such a grave offense, particularly against a Muslim, its words are that he shall fare, that person shall face the eternal punishment of hell. So the words are وَمَنْ يَقْتُلَ مُؤْمِنًا مُتَعَمِّدًا فَجَزَاؤُهُ جَهَنَّمُ جَهَنَّمْ خَالِدًا فِيهَا وَغَضِبَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَلَعَنَهُ وَأَعَدَّ لَهُ عَذَابًا عَظِيمًا. And he who intentionally kills a believer, his reward is hell. He shall abide therein forever, and the wrath and curse of God are upon him. He has prepared for him a dreadful doom. So, as far as the Quran is concerned, we should understand that if you are murdering someone, or if you're murdered or guilty of murdering someone, then, of course, unless the heirs of the person who has been killed or murdered, if they forgive, you don't have the right. There's no other option but to have the person or the murderer to be killed as well. But also here, one important point that must be understood is that if a state thinks that the person who is being granted as remission or being given some relief is a state criminal, or if sparing him will cause nuisance and furthermore he does not deserve any such mitigation, then this cannot be done. So it is important to understand that murder is not only a crime against a society and the state, it of course is a crime against that family also. The family of course can forgive, but this forgiveness will only be effective if the state also accepts this forgiveness, thinking that of course that this forgiveness is something that is warranted by the situation of that criminal. But if the state insists that this cannot be done or should not be done, then the forgiveness on the part of the family will not work, because as I said, this is not just a crime against the family, it's also a crime. Murder is also a crime against state and the society. So the important thing which has to be understood is that such is the heinous nature of murder, of killing someone, that it should create a tumult and commotion in the nation whenever such an instance takes place. Today we find people being killed mercilessly, randomly, every day in such a large number, but the Quran insists that even a single occurrence of murder should create this commotion. And until and unless a qisas is exacted from the criminal who is responsible for it, everyone should feel that he no longer has the protection of the law he formerly had. The law is the protector of all, and if it has been violated, a single person has not just been slain. It is as if the lives of all people of that nation are in danger and they can be slain. Also important is to realize that to search for the murderer is not just the responsibility of the heirs of the murdered person. In fact, it is the responsibility of the whole nation, because it is not just one life that has been taken or murdered, it is rather all lives have been taken. As the Quran has said, that taking one life is tantamount to taking all lives. So if one life has been taken, then it's like all lives have been taken, and therefore it's not just the responsibility of the state to search or investigate for that person. It is the responsibility of every individual, and he or she should take part in this investigation if need be. Another important thing is that if a person finds someone in danger, he should not ignore the situation by thinking that he is interfering in someone's affairs. Rather, he should defend and protect that person as much as he can, even if he has to endure difficulties, because this is how people who live in a collectivity should behave. Because a person who defends himself in fact defends humanity because he's part of that humanity. Similarly, a person who hides someone's murder or bears false evidence in favor of the murderer or stands as a guarantor or gives refuge to such a person or even legally pleads for him or intentionally excuses him, in fact does so for the murder of, in fact he goes as far to go and become the murderer of his own self, his father, his brother, his son, and the whole of the society. Because the murderer of one, as the Quran has said, is the murderer of every person. Also, to help the government or the heirs of the slain person in taking qisas is like giving life to the slain person, because as the Quran has said that there is life in qisas, and the Quranic words are وَلَكُمْ فِي الْقِصَاصِ حَيَاتٌ يَا أُولِي الْأَلْبَابِ, that in qisas there is life for you, O people of understanding. So, as far as the law is concerned, we can sum it up, this law of qisas, we can sum it up in the form of some clauses. And this will be a summary of how this whole law should be dealt with. Firstly, qisas is an obligation imposed by the Almighty on the Islamic State. I have already said this earlier on, that it guarantees survival to a society and is in fact a divine law which can only be breached by those who wrong their souls. So it is the responsibility of the government to search for the murderer, arrest him, and implement the will of the heirs of the murdered person. And of course, as I said, this should only be done in the case the state also agrees that if any remission is to be granted, then this remission must be something which the state also agrees to. Secondly, the second clause which is important here to realize is that complete equality should be observed in taking qisas. Complete equality. So remember, in the times of paganism, in the times of free Islamic Arabia, people were killed mercilessly. If one man would be killed, they would kill several in his place. They would start killing women, they would start killing slaves. So people who were innocent would be killed in place of the person who had murdered. But the Quran says that this equality has to be observed. So this is the second important clause, that equality should be observed in taking qisas. And that is why the Quran has said that if the murderer is a slave, only that particular slave should be executed. And if the murderer is a free man, only that particular free man should be executed, no one else. So a person's social status should never create an exception to this rule of equality, nor should it be given any emphasis in this regard. I would like you to take you back to the verse that we had been studying right at the beginning. So it says, Ya ayyuhallazina amanu kutiba alaykumul qisasu fil qatla al-hurru bil-hurri wal-abdu bil-abdi wal-untha bil-untha. This is that equality which I have just described. It says, if such a murderer is a free man, then this free man, the person who had killed, should be killed in his place. And if he's a slave, then this slave, the person who is guilty of the crime, only he should be the one who should be punished and no one else. And finally, it is also said that if the person who is guilty of murdering is a woman, then exactly the same woman who was guilty of that murder should be taken to task for this. So equality. So remember, the first thing that we have studied, the first clause is that it is the responsibility of the state to implement the will of the family. But remember, this is something which shall only be done once, if a remission is to be granted. Of course, if the family feels that the qisas has to be taken, then it shall be taken. But if there is to be any remission, any mitigation, any relief, then this should be in consonance and in harmony with the view of the state also. And the second important thing is that complete equality must be observed, and no one else must be executed in the place of the person who was the murderer. The third clause in this regard is that if the heirs of the slain, do not demand life for life, limb for limb, and wound for wound, the court can give a lesser punishment, keeping in view the nature of the crime and the circumstances of the criminal. So that is something which the Quran has said, that if he does not exact, and this doesn't mean that he will go scot-free. If a murderer is to be forgiven, of course that forgiveness must be in conformity with the state and of course the family of the murdered person, the heirs. But this doesn't mean that he shall go scot-free. The Quran says that this rebate is something in which a criminal will still be penalized, which means that some diyat will be exacted from that person. So if those affected by this crime adopt this atonement, it shall become an atonement for their sins before the Almighty. In other words, the thing which the Quran has also said is that if a person who forgives the other person, if those affected by this crime, they adopt this measure of forgiveness, then as the Quran says, فَمَنْ تَصَدَّقَ بِهِ فَهُوَ كَفَّارَةٌ لَهُ, that this shall become an atonement for their sins before the Almighty. So that forgiveness on the part of the crime, on the part of the heirs of the murdered person, will become an atonement for their sins before the Almighty. Fourthly, and importantly, is that if the wounded person or the heirs of the slain person agree to accept death, which means a penalty, then it should be given with kindness and goodwill. So remember, as I said, you cannot forgive. Forgiveness does not mean that the person will be set free. It still mean that he has been just exempted from being executed. A lesser penalty must be imposed, and this penalty is called diyat. And the Quran says that it should be given with kindness and goodwill, which means that it actually is a way that has paved the directive with kindness, because in that period in Arabia, we know that diyat was not given in the form of cash. The penalty was not monetary, so to speak. It was given in kind, in fact, more in the form of animals. So if the prayers of diyat had any, so of the person who would pay that diyat had any ill intention in his heart, he could defraud the receiving party. It is easily possible in case of camels and goats or even dates and other grains to pay diyat as far as the agreed quantity and weight is concerned, disregarding the quality and nature. So he could have given camels and goats and even grain, but the quality would have been compromised. And this, the Quran says that this is something which is not acceptable. So when the Quran says that you have to follow that remission with kindness, it means that don't go as far as to defraud that person, that you are paying diyat, but you're paying it in substandard stuff and material. And this would actually amount to ignoring the favor done by the aggrieved party by forgiving the murderer. So someone whose life had been left at the mercy of a person by the Sharia had been forgiven by him, and he has agreed to accept some wealth instead. So this favor should be answered by a favor only, which is that the payment should be done, the payment of diyat, the penalty should be paid with such magnanimity and munificence that the heirs of the slain person should not feel that by accepting camels and goats in place of the life of a beloved, they have committed a mistake or done something dishonorable. The importance given to the slain person's heirs in this law while deciding for any lenience for the criminal is based on great wisdom. You have that mercy left to the heirs of the family, if they can be merciful, it goes a great way in eliminating a lot of vendettas and spirit of revenge. It actually appeases their spirit of revenge. But also it goes a long way in ridding the society of such crimes. Because you see, leaving the life of the killer directly at the mercy of the heirs of the murdered person compensates to some extent the tremendous loss caused. Furthermore, if the heirs of the slain person, if they adopt an attitude at that moment which is based on softness and gentleness, they do a big favor to the family of the murdered person. And it can also produce many useful results. But we also need to remember that this does not at all mean that if at some place a formal government does not exist and the matter of qisas is solely left to the discretion of the heirs of the deceased, and they, in their capacity as heirs, should exceed the limits. For example, they slay others besides the slayer in frenzy from revenge. This should not be the case. We've already discussed this, that they cannot demand the execution of a free person in place of a slave, or a man in place of a woman, or kill the criminal by torturing him, or mutilating his body, or kill him through methods which have been prohibited by the Sharia, like for example had a corpse or mutilating it in any way. Because you see, when there is a strong chance that qisas would inflict more harm on the inflictor than the harm had he himself had inflicted, then insisting upon limb in place of limb, wound in place of wound is not the right thing. We also know that when the Prophet was in Mecca and his rule was yet to be established in Medina, the Almighty has said that in such a case, when you are living in a society in which there is no government at that time, then they should not exceed the limit. So the words of the Quran, if I just may refer to them, are that as far as the Quran is concerned, that he who wrongfully killed, وَمَنْ قُتِلَ مَظْلُومًا فَقَدْ جَعَلْنَا وَلِيِّهِ لِوَلِيهِ سُلْطَانًا فَلَا يُسْرِفْ فِي الْقَتْلِ إِنَّهُ كَانَ مَنْصُورًا, which means that a person who and whoever is killed wrongfully when there is no state government, when he have the Almighty says that we have given his heir an authority, so he should not exceed the bounds in taking a life, for he has been helped. So the basic objective of this law, as mentioned in the Quran, is that life does not relate to the individual, it relates to the society. If a murder is executed because of this crime, it apparently seems that a second life has been taken. That is why people often argue against capital punishment, because they say that once a life has been taken, now you're taking another life, and this is like taking two lives. But you see, you have to understand that this punishment actually guarantees the life of the whole society. If that second life is not taken, if of course it is to be taken, then this will put the life of every other individual in danger, in threat. If this punishment is not carried out, the mental disorder in which a person commits this crime is actually transmitted to the rest of the society. The extent of various diseases, they differ, but diseases which result in such heinous crimes as murder, robbery, theft, rape or fornication. Rape, of course, something which was dealt in our previous session in the case of Haraba. It is essential at times to do that surgery, because amputating a limb may seem a callous act, yet a doctor has to be callous when the infection is much greater. So if by showing sympathy to this limb, he does not force himself to this cruelty, so to speak, he may have to bear with the patient's death. A society in its collective capacity is like a body. At times its limbs get infected to the extent that they have to be removed through a surgical process. So this is as far as the objective of intentional murder is concerned. So inshallah, in our next session, next week, we'll take up the issue of unintentional murder, which is also something that we will be discussing. So if you have any questions regarding what we have discussed so far, please raise them.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum, Shehzad bhai. Actually, my question was related to accidental death, but you said you're going to discuss it in the next lecture. So it's only related to diyat, right? So
Right.
Obviously, I have a certain clarity in my mind that if the murder is not intentional, then the other person cannot be killed in case of accidental death.
Allahu Akbar,
Sorry.
Allahu.
But the law of diyat, would it apply in case of accidental death, or it's only for intentional murder?
No, it will apply to unintentional murder as well. So we will be discussing that inshallah next week. The Quran says it says that man qatala mu'minan khata'an fatahriru raqabatin mu'minatin wa diyatun musallamatun ila ahlihi, which means that diyat has to be paid. In the case of intentional murder, diyat is something that has to be paid at all cost. In the case of unintentional murder, diyat has to be paid except if the heirs of the deceased they forgive, but not in the case of intentional murder. In that case, the minimum amount is diyat, because the Quran has said zalika takhfifu min rabbikum wa rahma, that this is the least that you can do. However, in the case of unintentional murder, if the heirs of the deceased they forgive, then yes, even diyat can be foregone.
Can I ask a follow-up if there are
Yes,
no
please.
other? But Shehzad bhai, okay, fine. A simple scenario: somebody was driving on the road and somebody came in front of the car, and it was a total accident, right? God knows it was nobody's fault. It was meant to be. But even in that case, the diyat has to be paid.
No, certainly not. You see, unintentional murder means that it is totally unintentional. You were fully, you had fully, something that just came accidentally in front of you, and it was no fault of yours. In that case, there is to be something. In that case, nothing will be given taken from you. Unintentional murder means that you were slack in your behavior. For example, your brakes were not working, you were not fully aware of the person, and this was an oversight on your part. So it is for that oversight. You did not intentionally commit murder, but unintentionally, because you were not fully careful. Maybe you were under the influence of alcohol or some drug, or maybe, as I said, your car was not fully functional. It is here that now you have some fault. So intentional murder, the difference is that in the case of unintentional murder, there has to be some fault that is on your part. But a totally accidental murder, which means that it is the fault of someone else. For example, he just jumped in front of your car. In that case, this cannot be called as unintentional murder at all. This would be the fault of the person who came in front of your car.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Shehzad. Rafia Khwaja, you may ask your question now.
Slang, Dr. Shehzad. Dr. Shehzad, my question is that, like in the case of a murder, if somebody's son has gone and killed somebody, and can they ask for forgiveness? Do they have a right, even if they paid diyat or if they're not paid? Should they forgive the person, or shouldn't he be tried for the murder he has done? Sometimes pressures are put on family. Okay, please forgive our child did a certain thing wrong and by mistake. But does anybody have a right to take the life and then just ask for forgiveness and put pressure on the family to forgive him?
I mean, the pressure can in no way be exerted on the family. This is what the state will ensure. This is only when the family itself thinks that, well, if they would forgive, they will earn reward. As the Quran says, that forgiveness would be an atonement for their own sins. So this is something that is purely a willful act, something which they do out of their own will, and of course a touch of kindness. I mean, it needs a lot of kindness and a lot of your own magnanimity to forgive someone who has murdered a family member. But the important thing which I have also referred to in my main lecture was that, remember that this has happened on many occasions, especially in many Islamic countries, in which what happens is that a person is guilty of honor killing, which means that he ends up maybe murdering his sister. And then what happens is that the family of the heir, which is their own father and mother, because they also back the murderer, they forgive that person because they think that killing for honor is correct. So this is a case in point that I was referring to earlier on, that when this is the situation, then it is not just the forgiveness on the part of the heirs which will work. The state has to agree with them as well, because murder is not just a crime against that family, it's a crime against the society and the state also. So that is why any forgiveness, yes, if he goes and kills someone else, he can request for any remission, and the person the family has the full right not to accept their request. But if that request is to be accepted, then the state must agree that this is being done in the right way. So in order to circumvent this issue of honor killing, you see, this has happened, and this keeps happening in many countries, in which honor killings, people who are guilty of doing honor killings, they go free, because what happens is that the rest of the family forgives that person, their brother or their father, because they're already behind him, that yes, such a daughter or such a wife or such a sister did something bad when she married out of her own self. So remember, in Pakistan, in many countries like Pakistan, this issue of honor killings has not been addressed in a requisite way according to our law, because a person in a country like Pakistan, if he does an honor killing and the family members forgive that person, then nothing can be done. And only there.
Dr. Shehzad, sometimes they try to protect the son, and just because.
So it's not, yes, this is one of the cases, not just this. At times they protect the son, and at times they think that the honor killing is justified. So you see, it's not merely protection. Yes, at times protection is the case, but what is done is that one of the family members does this with this understanding that the rest of the family members will forgive him, because the rest of the family members also think that the woman had done a wrong thing by marrying outside their own tribe, or maybe running away with someone that she loved, whatever. So because this they think is an anathema, and they kill that woman, I mean, this is a heinous thing in itself. But to let a person who is guilty of such a heinous crime to go free is a bigger crime.
Thank you, Dr. Shehzad. Thank you, Rafia. I had a question, and that was related to if someone accidentally or deliberately kills someone in their defense. For example, a person is trying to kill, in cases like that happens when sometimes a husband is trying to kill his wife, or in potential rape case. So if a woman or the victim.
I understand. So killing in self-defense is not killing at all. I mean, when you are killing, when you end up killing someone, saving your own life, you're not guilty of murder. I mean, murder means that you have taken the initiative in taking the life of a person. That is what murder is. But when you are being attacked, so self-defense is an equally important directive. And if you kill the other person in self-defense, then this will never be regarded as intentional or unintentional murder.
Yes, but how should the state, ensure that this was
Well, this is something, yeah, so, right, so this is something which the state will investigate. I mean, human error can always be there, but if it is reasonably evident that this is how things happen, that this was just self-defense in which this killing occurred, then they have the authority. I mean, they can take a wrong decision, but the principle is the same. The principle is that any killing in self-defense cannot be regarded as a murder, but this must be established.
Thank you, Dr. Shehzad. Shiraz Ahmed has another question, so you may proceed and ask.
Okay.
I may sound weird because I'm asking too many questions on the topic of murder. Shehzad, the Quran never mentioned the amount of diyat, right? So is it the family of the deceased who are going to decide the amount, or the state is going to set an amount? Maroof ki pairwi jisko kehte hain karna, how it's going to be decided?
So you see, the Quran has just said one thing, "Fattiba'um bil ma'ruf," which means that you obey the custom of your society. So there are two options available in this case. Either the custom already exists, as was the case in the Arabian society, that the diyat was set at 100 camels. So this was a age-old custom. So this could have been carried on, this could have been changed. So a custom at times already exists. Or in the absence of any a prior any such amount, state can legislate and ascertain a certain amount. So if the custom is already there, no new legislation is needed, but in the absence of any custom, that legislation will be done by the state, and it shall have the precedence of the times of the Prophet, of course, and also at the same time, people who are sitting in the parliament will understand that as far as this diyat is concerned, this is left to the custom. It has not been fixed. It is a reasonable amount that a person should be exacted from in the case of these forms of murder, and they can legislate keeping in view the society, the conditions of the society, and the people who live there. And that is why diyat has not been ascertained, and it is a grave misconception in our current Islamic law in which they think that diyat was actually something that was fixed in the case of the Arabian culture, and of course it was in their times, but this is something which is not an eternal law. It is not something to be followed, and paying diyat in the form of 100 camels is neither possible today, nor is it the requirement of the Sharia. The requirement is to follow the custom, and in the absence of the custom, parliament or a legislative body can fix or ascertain a certain amount of diyat.
And
Thank you, Dr.
sorry, Ruba, one last follow-up question. Earlier on, the sister was asking that if in self-defense, the lady kills the potential rapist, I would like you to comment on it a bit more, that such incidents, the lady should be, rewarded for it. This mindset that she committed a murder, I think you need to comment on this a bit more. You already did. But I think
I mean, it does not. Yes, because you see, self-defense is like saving one life. You're saving your own life, and that is what the Quran wants you to do. That it wants to save your life. If your own life is important, and saving someone's life or saving your own life amounts to the same thing. You are saving one human life. So saving one human life is what the Quran has said is like saving all mankind. So basically, you have saved yourself. In that case, you have saved all mankind, and you've given this message to all other people who are rapists or who do such things, that self-defense is something that is always going to be there, and it's not going to be punishable in any way.
Thank you, Dr. Shehzad. Akram Bhatti, you may ask your question now.
Assalamu alaikum, sir.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Sir, when you say that it should be reasonable amount, shouldn't it be according to status or resources, or a resourceful person can pay $100,000 just like that, but a poor person he will not be able to. So
yes, that is fine. The Sharia can legislate that in the cases of certain brackets of certain people who are rich, this will be the diyat. Others who cannot afford, who are of lesser financial position, they can have this diyat. So it can legislate the amount, keeping in view the financial status of the person, and also leave it to the discretion of the judge. So at times you can also do that you just leave it to the judge and tell him with this, you give this guideline to that judge that whenever you decide a case of diyat, look at the financial status of the person.
Thank you, sir. Jazakallah.
Thank you, Dr. Shehzad. Rafia Khwaja, you may ask your question.
Dr. Shehzad, there was a very well-known case many years ago where a very well-known family, whose daughter was married of her own choice, had approached Asma Jahangir and has entered the lawyer's office, where the parents followed her and actually killed her on the steps of the office. And I don't know what happened to the parents, but when you find well-known people get away with murder and I don't know, the state can't even catch them because they're influential. There's no justice then.
Of course. That is why I said that if a family member kills some other family member and he thinks or she thinks that they would be forgiven by the rest of the family members, this is not the case. This would be a misunderstanding of the law of Qisas. The law of Qisas doesn't simply state that it is only the heirs who would be responsible of forgiving, because this murder is not just a crime against an individual, it's a crime against the state as well. So a state will also have a say in this, in that forgiveness. So they will be only forgiven. I don't remember the details of that case because you see, our own law is not according to what the Quran has said. They must have been set free. But if the law which the Quran prescribes was to be followed, they could not have been set free.
Thank you, Dr. Shehzad. I would like to just ask a follow-up question on Rafia Khwaja's question. So if a father kills his daughter, who should the state contact or for the qisas or diyat stuff?
As I said, if this is a case that the father kills the daughter because of, let's say, honor killing or any such thing, then the state does not need to contact anyone. This in itself is something which severs all contacts, and he's simply guilty of murder. And for example, if the mother or the brother or any other heir, they agree to kill the father and they are, as I said, in connivance with them, and they already planned this murder because they thought that she has done something which is unbecoming of their family status or their ego was bashed. This is something for which the state does not need to come forward in any way. So it can take its own step and it can exact qisas from that person, from the father, of course.
Adila Asad, you may ask your question now.
Walaikum salam.
Walaikum salam.
We are doing this ayat about qisas, and you explained that it is up to the authorities to take the action. We cannot take the law in our own hands. But from the words of the ayah, how do we know that it's for the authorities? Can't anyone interpret it for themselves?
Right. So So you see, it's not just this verse that you need to understand. There are two verses in the Quran. So one of them is that we just studied, which says that you can, if there is a concession on the part of the family, then that can be followed and the diyat can be paid. But don't forget the verse which starts off by these words, Ya ayyuhallazina amanu kutiba alaykumul qisasu fil qatla, that qisas is enjoined upon you, and it addresses the state. So this is a verse, I think I have already quoted that earlier. This is verse 178 of Surah Baqarah that we studied in the beginning. It says, Kutiba alaykumul qisasu fil qatla, addressing the state that taking qisas is a responsibility of yours, which means that it's not just the family who is one of the stakeholders, it's the state as well. So any decision regarding the forgiveness of the criminal will have to be taken jointly by the two. And if the state does not agree that this forgiveness is warranted, then that shall not be given, because remember, that particular verse tells us the right of the family, because the right of an individual has been violated. But the Quran at another instance has said that it is also the right of the society, because killing someone, as I said, is not just a crime against the individual, it's also a crime against the state and the society. So that is why that verse will also come into play.
Okay, so we have to take few verses into and look at them together.
Both verses, yes.
Yeah, to understand the.
It is the same verse. Basically, this is the same verse. It is the same verse. and it is verse 178 and 179. Let me read it out again to you because this might be more refreshing for you. It says that believers decreed for you is the qisas of those among you who are killed, which means that, this is the state authority which is being addressed. And then if you go further down, it says فَمَنْ أُخِيَ لَهُ مِنْ أَخِيهِ شَيْءٌ فَاتِّبَاعٌ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ, which means that then for whom there has been some relief from his brother, you can accept this relief, but it is essential that this should be followed according to the ma'ruf and diyat should be paid. So you see, both these, the single verse addresses both the stakeholders, which is the state as well as the family.
Right. Yes, I understand. Thank you, sir. And if I have another question. This is in particular qisas about killing someone, but there are different kind of crimes too, or what can I say, like bad deeds or something like abusive relationships, emotional abuse, verbal abuse, stuff like that. So in case of those those kind of crimes, I don't know if I should call them crimes. How do we go about asking for justice in those?
You see, when it is a case of emotional abuse, when it is a case of people having bad attitudes towards their parents or their spouses or their family members, this is more related to therapy, which can be given, of course, by the elderly of the family, by making people who are guilty of such bad attitudes, making them understand. At the same time, if they are prepared, they can, of course, go and see a therapist. But the Quran has not made it a point of criminal punishment, because these are things that can be addressed through education, through grooming people, through educating them. It is only when they commit an offense against some physical aspect. For example, you abuse someone, you wound someone, you injure someone in some way, and then just as qisas is ordained for murdering someone, the Quran says wal juruha qisas, which means that in the case of injury also qisas shall be exacted and diyat can be paid. So unless this physical injury aspect is there, emotional injury or mental injury, all these are to be addressed by the society at large, by the elderly people, by people who can advise that person. Or if he becomes more he spreads more nuisance, then of course he can be reported to the state authorities, because when he becomes a threat to more than the family itself, then people, of course, they can take their case to a local police magistrate and say that this person is guilty of harming people, although they might not be, to that extent of murdering someone, but harm is always there. So in that case, the state can also take evasive action. But before that can even happen, I think it's much more appropriate if some therapy, some mental therapy is sought for such a person.
Okay, so because I live in the society and I see all these kind of things around me, so I see that we don't. Up till a few years ago, we didn't take emotional abuse or verbal abuse as a big thing, but now it has become a big issue for everyone around us, and it can. We have seen that it can lead to disastrous circumstances. So that's why I was wondering that what does Quran say about something like that, if that is going on somewhere?
So as I said, the emotional abuse factor has been left for the elderly or people who can influence the person. They are friends, they are other people who might have that influence in talking the person out. And if he becomes too dangerous, then of course he can be reported to some. It should be addressed. Yeah, it should be addressed. But before you take the person to some law agency, I think it's much more worthwhile if some therapy can be conducted and some sense can be talked into him.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Shehzad. Shiraz Ahmed has another question, so please unmute your mic and answer.
Shehzad, this is a very important question for me. Verse 178 says, Ya ayyuhallazina amanu kutiba alaykumul qisas, right? So when it says Ya ayyuhallazina amanu, means it's talking to the Muslim Ummah, means the state as a whole, right? But verse 183, just 5 verses later, it says Ya ayyuhallazina kutiba alaykumus siyam. Now it's talking about fasting. So the question is that I think it's not just the mere words, when the Quran addressed the entire Muslim Ummah as a whole, it's also the nature of the command that adds to it whether the state can take up this task or not. For example, in case of Ya ayyuhallazina amanu kutiba alaykumus siyam, it's my understanding, which can be totally wrong, and please correct me. State cannot force me to fast during the month of Ramadan. It's between me and God, even though the wording is
Correct.
exactly the same. So I would like request you to elaborate on that a bit, please.
Yes, correct. You have rightly said that it's the content of what is to be said which matters. So fasting or praying, things like fasting, of course, because that is what the verse says, is purely something which is addressed to the believers in their individual capacity. So there is a slight nuance here that has to be understood, that Ya ayyuhallazina kutiba alaykumus siyam, Ya ayyuhallazina amanu kutiba alaykumus siyam, exactly the same words. So here the Muslims are being addressed at large. The state is not there. I mean, the state does exist, but the address refers to each and every Muslim individually. But in the case of Ya ayyuhallazina amanu kutiba alaykumul qisas, this is basically a collective responsibility. So waging war or giving punishments is a collective responsibility. Now it is of course the words are the same. Now the population at large is being commanded something. But because the nature of this command is something which relates to a collective action, so now that action must be taken on behalf of the society, and the only competent authority to do that is the state. So you see, in the case of fasting, no action was to be taken. Whatever was being told was being said to the individual, and he would need to comply. But in this case, believers are said that they have to take a certain action. So when they have to take a certain action, they have to behave in the form of a collectivity, and a collectivity can only behave in the form of a collectivity through its representative, which is the state. This is the very nuanced difference that must be understood, because the action which is to be taken, which the verse says or recommends, is different. I mean, in one case you just need to do something for your own self. In the other case, now you have to tamper with the life of some other individual.
Thank you, Shehzad, because this is a very common pattern that I have seen, and not everybody is Shehzad Saleem. So what people do is they normally compare the wording of different verses at different places, and they say that if one logic can be applied in one place, then why can't it be applied at another place? And that's where we need people like you to kind of differentiate and mention these nuances that no, you cannot simply copy paste the meaning of one wording and entirely ignore the context, right? So thank you very much.
So we have one more question. Nushaba Wasim, please unmute your mic and ask your question.
अस्सलाम वालेकुम सर, मेरा क्वेश्चन विरासत के बारे में है कि मैंने रिसेंटली कहीं पढ़ा था कि अगर आप बाप की जिंदगी में बेटा मर जाए तो उसकी विरासत उसके ग्रैंडसन को या ग्रैंड डॉटर्स को नहीं जाती, तो इसके बारे में आपकी क्या राय है या कुरान में क्या रहनुमा?
So as far as this issue of the inheritance of the orphan grandchild is concerned, the Quran does not cover it. And because the Quran does not cover it, the opinion of our majority jurists is that such a grandchild will not receive any inheritance if his father or her father passes away in their lifetime. But according to our understanding, this is not correct, because the word Abba, as you can see, the Quran uses the words Abun, which extends not only to the father, but in the Arabic language it goes to the grandfather and to the great grandfather as well. So therefore, in that case, if the inheritance of the orphaned grandchild, he will receive or she will receive, or the children who are there will receive whatever was the share of their own father if he was alive. So that share would be transferred to the orphan children. But as I said, this is an ijtihad, because the Quran is silent on this issue, and the ijtihad is based on this linguistic principle which I just described. And there are countries in which this is not accepted. Recently, we had this change in our law as well in Pakistan. Formerly, the inheritance was given to an orphan grandchild. This was because the family laws in the times of the late Ayub Khan who had these family laws in place in his own times. It had a time bar, and I think it was some 40 or 50 years. And once that time bar finished, now legislation has to be done again. And to the best of my understanding, the new legislation says that the orphan grandchild shall not be given any inheritance. But this is, as I said, their understanding. As far as my understanding is concerned, I believe that it is based on the Quran, on this very linguistic principle that in the absence of the father, the grandfather actually takes the place of the father, because the same word can be used for both, which is ab. Ab means, it extends to the father and to the grandfather. So the inheritance which was supposed to be given to the child, to that father, will now be given to the children in his place.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shehzad. Adila, please ask your question. We have only a few minutes, so please keep it
Thank you,
concise.
Ruba. Dr. Saab, the law of diyat, does that apply in also the cold-blooded planned murders, or is it only for accidental murders?
It applies for both.
Okay. Okay. But it depends upon the state to.
Yes. As I said, that if the state is fully assured that this is something which was done in connivance, or such a person is a criminal of the state and he does not deserve any lenience, then it can intervene in that forgiveness which has to be given by the family, and it can say that, well, no, we will not grant that remission to him.
Right. Thanks.
And Shiraz Ahmed, you may also concisely ask your question.
Okay, Shehzad, there's a common misconception still that zakat is only 2.5% that you pay after 1 year on your wealth, and the tax that you pay to state on your salary or monthly income or whatever, it's not considered zakat. So can you just briefly, in 2-3 sentences, just explain that why this misconception exists, and what material can layman refer to just to identify?
I would actually refer you to a lecture that I gave just last week, and I think it has been now uploaded. It was a comprehensive, in my view, a comprehensive survey of the issue of zakat, the way our previous scholars understood it and the way my understanding goes. So I think because it's a very comprehensive thing and I would not be able to cover it in a few minutes, I would request you to just look it up. I think Aruba will guide you to the link of that lecture. It was just recently uploaded, I think last week or maybe 10 days ago.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Jazak.
Thank you, Dr. Shehzad, and thank you all the participants for asking questions and actively participating in the session.